what we have seen in the past. Let's jump right in. The budget this year, $291.5 billion budget, the budget that we are sending to the legislature. Again, begins a process, doesn't end the process. It's a process of engagement, two-way conversation with the legislature. It's a process that, as you know well, unfolds over the period of time, particularly as we're the beneficiary of more information. That's why there's a May revise. That's really the prime time. Not January's budget, but the May budget. And that explains a lot of the discrepancy that invariably you will inquire about after not this general fund number, but this deficit projected number. $37.86 billion, $37.9 billion projected shortfall that we're looking to close. And those of you who've been writing about a different number, I hope you're immediately correcting that number. We have been pretty damn transparent with you by making the point publicly, not just privately, that that number was not the number.
What's going on, Mutha Truckers? Welcome to Mutha Trucker News. Email us at muthatruckernews@gmail.com. Have you seen the live video that just was released today by Governor Gavin Newsom of California? I mean, 2 years ago, California had a $100 billion surplus. And now they thought it was going to be $68 billion, but it's actually $38 billion in the whole deficit. You know, and he's explaining, saying that they had to pretty much pay off some bills, shift some things around, and next thing you know, poof, no more money, right? And so he's not cutting everything. You know, things with education, homelessness, safety, he's keeping those things. And I'm not saying those things aren't important for the budget, but there's a big one that he is cutting, and he's cutting is EV subsidies. So he's trimming that proposal and budget cutting that. Now the infrastructure for charging stations and going zero emissions by 2035 or whatnot, there's a real good chance that that might not happen. You know, let's get into this right here. This is a great article right here by Transport Topics. So I want to share it with you guys, and I'll put the links down below. It says, as California faces they put $68 billion, but it's $38 billion deficit, Governor Gavin Newsom has proposed significant cuts to clean energy and transportation programs designated to help the state confront the worsening effects of climate change. Newsom's proposed budget released January 10th would cut and delay a net of $4.8 billion from climate and transportation efforts. Most notably, he plans to cut subsidies for electric vehicles and funding for clean energy programs. So if you were planning on getting rid of your old diesel truck and the government giving you some money for that so you could go out and buy a electric or hydrogen truck or whatnot, that potentially is not happening anymore. They're cutting that. So for people that want diesel trucks, it looks like you're going to be safe for a little bit. You know, I'm going to update you guys on everything, but I thought this was very important that you know that they're cutting all these energy and transportation programs. And so, you know, we could consider that good news for the ones that don't want change. But Mutha Truckers, comment down below. What are your thoughts about this? You know, to be a $100 billion surplus just a couple years ago to now a $38 billion deficit. I mean, so many people are leaving California. They're not making their tax money. All the businesses are leaving. You know, he says they're not in a recession, but again, I don't know. You know, here's a clip of the live where he's talking about the budget cuts that he's going to have to make. And yeah, not looking good for 38 million Californians, right? And when you look up the data, there's over 130,000 truck drivers within the state and so many more thousands that come into the state. So, you know, would you consider this good news or bad news as far as the energy part? But as far as the budget, I don't know, man. You might have to find your way out of California.
So you came here for this slide. Well, the next one. And that is, how are you going to close a $37.9 billion shortfall? Well, here's how. 18.8, 11.9, 7.2, things that are familiar to you. You saw some of this last year. And why'd you see some of this last year and this year? It's because we anticipated this moment. I mentioned that $101.4 billion surplus. 93% of that budget we set aside for one-time purposes. We maxed out on our reserves. We have a statutory cap of 10%. That's why we need to reform that. We need to capture more than 10%. That's my humble opinion. That's going to take some work. It's going to take some public support. It's going to take some education and partnership. But we maxed out on that. We paid down pension liability. We'll talk about all that in a minute. But we intentionally, you may recall, I had a slide saying I had a goal of 99% of all that. And everyone laughed, thought it was a typo. We negotiated with the legislature, but we still kept it at 93. That was among the historical high in terms of one-time surpluses for one-time purposes. Again, multi-year commitments that we can pull back or we can extend. Again, part of our fiscal management. By the way, we have $91.4 billion of borrowing capacity in the state. That was at least as of November, so a few weeks ago, $91.4 billion. So from a cash perspective, from a reserves perspective, because of the fiscal planning and management, because of the one-time framework of focus, it allows us for a second year to do something, again, that should be familiar in terms of how we ultimately balance. And that is around reserves, a little revenue. Revenue I'll talk about, which is primarily the MCO, $3.8 billion, which is very familiar. So that's not a new business tax or anything. There's no wealth tax. There's no income tax. There's no taxes. They're modest little things on NOLs. We could talk about. I'm sure you all want to write about that. So you're going to ask me, and I'm going to walk you through the details. Well, they'll walk you through the details. I'll give you the top line. So let's talk about that resilience. Rainy day withdrawal. We're going to pull $13.1 billion from the two reserve accounts. Now, I don't want to confuse you, and we had it out with finance, my team. Should I include the 5.7? You're going to say, wait, you mean revenue borrowing? No, this is why we didn't include it. It's exactly 5.7 that we're pulling under the Prop 98 reserve, but I'm going to get to that separate. But that's not part of the balancing, remember, of the general fund. That's separate. But I'm going to get to that. And I just want to seed you with that so you'll understand the next slide. So we're pulling 18.8 billion, 13.1, and then the revenue and borrowing, special fund 1.4, 3.8 on the MCO. We'll talk about the rest, but that gives you roughly what we're doing here. But here's the good news. It still allows us to maintain $18.4 billion in reserves. This, by the way, also includes the school rainy day fund, of which we're pulling 5.7 this year, but it appears here for the purposes of understanding the reserves, the overall reserves that we have. By the way, you'll see a new reserve because we added to our own shortfall in terms of our need to balance an additional $3.4 billion in this SFEU account, which is basically a checking account. It's like line of credit of sorts, but with the money in the bank. So we're going to add an additional $3.4 billion for emergencies and uncertainties. So that actually added to our burden, if that makes some sense. And if it doesn't, happy to discuss it. So pulling down $13.1 billion from the two reserves, additional 5.7 on 98, that's not on this slide, maintaining this level of reserves for a rainy day. Also continuing our commitment to pay down long-term obligations. I think this is critical. Last 5 years, you can see $12.4 billion paying down unfunded liabilities. It's health, not just traditional retirement. Next 4 years, we're committing in the forecast period $8.6 billion, and you see the $2.1 billion that we're continuing to invest in paying down the long-term debt. So we're maintaining that consciousness and focus on the out years. Let's talk about the belt tightening. Again, 3 areas here. On the belt tightening, you may have seen a number of weeks back, months back, we said no new cars, no more travel that's not essential, no more cell phones, iPhone 12 or 20. You can live with the 19. What is it now, 15? Something? It's no. Sadly, well, you guys may even get the memo, and then as well as our fleet, new cars and all that. So we did what you do at home, and we did that. And people say, "Well, hold on, when did you do that?" I said, "Right when we got the receipts." So let me remind you of something that I could have began this long preamble or longer preamble. All of this uncertainty happened because we experienced something we've never experienced in modern history in the state. We didn't collect taxes in April of last year. Why is there a May revise? There's a May revise purposely because it allows you to revise your estimates on the basis of what you've actually received in terms of revenue and tax collection, because we all know tax day, or we used to, in California, used to be in April. The IRS extended it twice. It was extended to October 16th, and then they extended it again to November 16th. So the legislative analyst went in estimating about $47 billion of revenue in their May revise that didn't appear. We projected about $43 billion in revenue, 42.9 that didn't appear. We weren't that far off on our guesstimates, but we had a blindfold on. Both of us, all of us. And so last year we balanced a budget that would have been a little higher, significantly higher, the deficit, and we would have attended to most of those issues in that May revise and that balanced budget, but we didn't know because we weren't privy to that information that every other state and historically all prior budgets had benefited from. So when we finally got those receipts in, we immediately moved to advance some of these efficiency efforts and to continue the work we're doing. And by the way, you may recall a couple of years ago, even when things were good, we reduced overall efficiency of government services by 5%. That's annualizing hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it was $239 million the first year. I don't know where it is today, but the point is, I love everyone lecture me. You should belt tighten like, well, that's exactly what we've been doing. And so we extended even more efforts in November and December. So that is top line on that. Here's a little bit more of what you came to understand. We've got fund shifts, $3.4 billion. Again, I'm going to let Joe and the team get through all these details, but it is $3.4 billion. The climate, maintain 89% of the overall commitment, roughly 90%, but there is some reductions, particularly because we got all that federal dollars, all those new monies. We got infill infrastructure housing. Remember, $40 billion since 2019 in housing. $40 billion, unprecedented. California's never invested in housing. We're going to make some adjustments on some of these planning regional grants, infill infrastructure grants. 700, I think it's what, 762 on vacant positions? 762.5 is, I think, if I'm off, it's because they shook their head, but they didn't give me the number. But I think it's 762.5 million just on vacant position savings. School facilities program still has $1 billion, but we're going to pull some money back. And we also have a school bond that will be out as well. So that's part of the belt tightening in terms of that balance. Now on delays and deferrals, that's the third category. These are, again, just delays and deferrals. Transit, it's the capital, still have $1 billion. The facilities grant program you see I talked about, so you already know about that. Some of these clinic grants, again, the team will get into the details on some of these things, but just delayed a little bit. Not denied, just delayed. Again, most of this came from abundance beyond our wildest expectation, and we're just going to push it out a little bit in order to get where we need to go. So again, there's your list, and this adds up to the number. It allows us to put $3.4 billion of money into that line of credit, that checking account as well, and continue to make investments in our long-term unfunded liabilities. So that is this year's presentation.